into the split-level house on a pale October afternoon, and the air in Lorain County cold enough to crisp their lungs. The living room was a rectangle of beige carpet and blank walls, a perfect canvas, except for one oddity, a back corner near the floor vent, where the paint looked a half shade darker, like a bruise under skin. The family dog, a stocky black and white mutt named Baxter, noticed first. He crept toward that corner, tail low, then stopped, hackles rising as if the carpet itself had hissed. A low growl leaked out of him, the kind that trembles the ribs more than the ears. New smells, the dad said, distracted, hauling a box marked tools to the hallway. Grandma Alma, silver hair in a tight bun, paused with the photo albums. Smells, she repeated, and let the word hang. The mom, Julie, pressed a smile thin enough to cut paper. The kids, 15-year-old Nate and 9-year-old Emmy, ran loops around the couch, already arguing about who got the bigger bedroom. They had come for a fresh start, cheaper mortgage, quiet street, a place where 1998 could close with fewer bills and more dinners at an actual table. That table sat now beneath the front window, half assembled, while the back of the living room sharpened into shadow as evening fell. The other corners disappeared in ordinary dusk. Only that one drank light with a thirst. When the furnace kicked on, the vent under that corner rattled a quick metallic chatter that made Baxter's ears snap upright. Old ductwork, Dad said. He said it like a diagnosis that cured itself. They ate pizza on paper plates while the TV flickered through rabbit ear static. Nate tuned it to a local game show. Emmy fed Baxter crusts when Mom wasn't looking. Baxter took them gently, never breaking his stare from the shadowed wedge of wall. A neighborhood siren wound through the night outside, rising and falling like a blade being sharpened in the distance. Grandma Alma closed her eyes and whispered a prayer. No words, just the melody of one, while her fingers walked a rosary she kept in her pocket. The beads clicked softly, a dry little rain in her palm. After dishes, Dad carried down the last box from the attic and found something unexpected on top an old Hi-8 camcorder, the kind with a rubber eye cup and a shoulder strap stiff with dust. Inside the case lay 2 cassettes labeled in faded marker XMAS 95 and basement. Previous owners left us a relic, he said, half amused. Might be fun to see. He set the camera on the TV stand as if the technology itself were a housewarming gift. Grandma's mouth pinched. Some gifts don't belong to the living, she said softly. The first night always lies, Dad liked to say. You think a house is quiet until you sleep in it. This house did not lie. It performed. At 12:03 a.m., Baxter's bark cracked the hallway sharp and frantic, ricocheting off door frames with a drum-like thump. A second bark followed deeper, as if dragged down a well. Dad sat up the mattress groaning. Just raccoons. From the living room came a skittering, a rapid scratch, scratch, scratch across cheap paint, with fingernails pacing. Mom touched his arm. John don't. But John went. He found Baxter planted at the threshold of the living room, paws, spread chest heaving. The dog would not cross onto the carpet. That corner towel, dark in the furnace-warmed room, seemed to bow toward them like a hunched listener. John took a breath and stepped in. Something sighed through the vent, breathy, intimate, as if the house exhaled inside his ear. When John said aloud as much for himself as for the dog. He crouched, pressed the back of his hand to the wall. Cold. Not cool like shade. Cold like a freezer door gaping in July. He shot a look at the thermostat, 70 degrees. He looked back at the corner and saw it for the first time, a faint smudge near the baseboard gray, like city snow in the rough shape of a handprint sliding down. A soft tap, tap, tap began inside the wall, spaced like a heartbeat too steady to be random. "Pipes," he said, standing too quickly. His knee popped a little crack that sounded louder than it should. By morning, the family acted as if nothing had happened. Emmy stirred cereal. Nate hunted for the bus schedule. John called a contractor about the furnace. Julie made a list on a yellow pad. The list grew tales of worry calls, school change, DMV address, find dentist. And she added after a pause, by night lights. Emmy knelt by Baxter. "Buddy, you okay?" She kissed the white patch between his eyes. Baxter licked her cheek, tail thumping. He was fine until he looked toward the corner. Then his body stiffened again, like a photograph of a dog pretending to be statue. At 3:17 p.m., when the house had settled to a Sunday hum, a tiny sound floated from the corner high and breathy a child's laugh with the top half missing. Emmy froze. "Nate, not me." Nate called from upstairs, the floorboards complaining under his sneakers. A second laugh drifted out wronger, like a recording played backward, so the joy curled into itself and turned thin. That evening, after Emmy's dance class and a stop at the grocery store, Julie finally asked what hovered in the space between all of them. "Do we smell gas mold something wrong in that corner?" John shrugged. "Damp drywall. House is settling." Grandma looked at her son for a long time. That look had the tired weight of 2 decades and 3 states. "Settling," she repeated, and your mother's voice could make any word into a prayer or a curse. Sometimes both. Before bed, John dug out the camcorder and loaded the tape labeled Basement. The camera whirred alive, the little red light blooming like a wound. The screen showed a previous family's footsteps. Down the concrete stairs, the beam of light jittering. A man's voice, careful shaky, narrated something about a smell. In the background, a radio upstairs murmured a late-night host's voice, a faraway river of vowels. The footage cut to black without explanation. John clicked it off. Old owners were creeps, Nate said too loud. At 11:41 p.m., a low, steady thumping started behind the corner, as if someone on the other side had a broom and a reason. Baxter's growl rippled into a bark, then another bark, then a ragged series that made Emmy cry out, "Stop it!" John grabbed the camcorder. "If it's animals, I want proof for the contractor." He set the camera on a stack of boxes facing the corner, red light blinking the timestamp stuttering in the viewfinder. 11:44:02, 03:04. He pulled the vent cover with a screwdriver. Cold air licked his knuckles. He aimed a flashlight down the metal throat. Shiny dust, a tangle of spider webs, something else. Ash. He couldn't name it because the word wouldn't come. He reached in with a gloved hand and felt grit brittle as bone. He yanked his hand back. A whisper gusted up the duct, and on its tail, a wet, swallowed sob. John flinched so hard, he knocked the camcorder sideways. Heard that he asked, voice thin. Julie nodded, face drained of its math teacher cheer. "I heard something." Grandma Alma stood at the threshold, rosary pinched tight. Her prayer rose a tremble of syllables, and the beads clicked faster, a train of dry little stones. They slept in the same rooms, but not the same house, not anymore. All night the furnace rattled and coughed in the registers, a broken accordion wheezing under the floor. From the corner came a slow scrape, like a chair shifting across concrete, though there was no chair there at all. Once very faint, a child's voice said, here bright as a bubble and cold as the inside of a freezer. Emmy sat up, eyes wide, and Baxter leapt onto her bed, curling against her with a trembling sigh that sounded almost human. In the morning, John found a new smudge beneath the baseboard, a half-moon of gray, like the heel of a palm, pressed hard. He measured the wall, knocked along the studs, and circled the spot in pencil. "We'll open it up," he told Julie. "Call it a weird venting problem, run new duct. It's a house, not a seance." Grandma looked toward the corner. "Something wants the livin' to make a hole," she said. "Sometimes a hole is an invitation." Emmy drew Baxter in crayon that afternoon, his white blaze, his funny ears, the way he tipped his head when you said cookie. In the corner of the page, she shaded a triangle of black. She decided that if she drew it, she controlled it. Every child believes in magic until it works. At 9:06 p.m., while Julie folded towels, a thin ticking rose from the corner, steady as a metronome. It stopped and came back faster, a tiny foot running in place inside the wall. "John," she called. "Listen." He came with the camcorder again, with its little eye that pretended to witness and understand. He set it on a stack of books this time, tightened the strap around the lamp so it wouldn't fall. They all gathered, the parents, the kid's grandma, the dog staring at drywall, as if it were a stage. The house seemed to hold its breath with them. When the grandfather clock in the hall struck 10, each chime sounded a notch too flat, as if muffled by a hand that wasn't there. On the 8th chime, Baxter exploded into barking so fierce his voice cracked. On the 9th, the ticking inside the wall turned to scratching. On the 10th, from behind the corner, something laughed again. But now the laugh had gravel in it, the texture of a throat that had forgotten how. John reached out a hand and laid his palm against the cold spot. For a heartbeat, he felt movement on the other side like breath. He snatched his hand back, eyes shining with the exhausted fury of a man refusing to be frightened in his own house. He said to no one and everyone, "Tomorrow I open it." The coroner answered with a single deliberate knock. John kept his word. Saturday at noon, he rolled a plastic drop cloth over the beige carpet, set a lamp on the mantel to aim light into the corner, and opened his red toolbox. Julie stood with her arms folded, half furious, half afraid. Grandma Alma sat at the table where she could see rosary threaded through her fingers. Nate filmed on the old camcorder, the red tally light blinking like a nervous pulse. Emmy hugged Baxter on the couch, whispering into his fur. The house hummed with the furnace's low breath, a steady animal sigh under the floor. From the corner itself came a faint, arrhythmic tapping like someone drumming two knuckles inside a wooden box. John scored the gypsum board along the pencil circle he'd made last night. "It's just a wall," he said, and drove the flat bar under the seam. The panel popped with a reluctant crack. He eased it forward, revealing a dark void between studs. Cold air slithered out, dry as a museum. A brittle rattle came from the duct, a tinny tsk-tsk, as if something down there disapproved. "See," John said, forcing cheer. "Old duct, weird cavity." He aimed the flashlight. What the beam found was not pipes or wires, but a rectangle someone had framed inside the wall years ago, like a built-in shrine. On the bottom sat an old metal coffee can, its paint flaked to the word Max. Well, the rest gone. The lid had been sealed with a dull ring of solder. When John touched the can, the metal gave a tired ping, a cheap bell struck softly. Julie's face changed. "Don't open that. It could be mouse remains a nest. Decomp attracts pests." Grandma's voice was barely louder than air. "Or it's a thing someone wanted to keep in the dark." John pried the lid with a screwdriver, working around the soldered lip until it lifted with a stubborn sigh. Inside lay gray powder and white flecks, like seashell grit. Ash. Bone. Nestled against the inside rim was a flattened brass tag stamped with numbers 18476. Beneath it, a strip of cloth, prison drab with faded block letters O Doc, Cest G. Somewhere beyond the studs, a long, strained inhale moved through the wall, as if the house itself had remembered a lung. Nate lowered the camera for a second. Oh, man. Emmy tightened her hold on Baxter. The dog stared so hard at the can that his eyes seemed to rattle. John set the lid on the drop cloth, swallowed, and forced his voice into practical. Somebody kept cremains in the wall. Illegally. We'll call the police. Julie nodded, shaky. And say what? Hi, our living room has a coffee can full of human remains. Exactly that. From the duct a whisper rose, shh, then frayed into a damp, swallowed sob, and the same sound John had heard last night. Baxter's throat rolled a warning growl that deepened until it vibrated the couch frame. Grandma's beads clicked faster. Her prayer gathered into a soft murmur, syllables touching like leaves. John looked at the brass tag again, then at the strip of cloth. Department of Corrections, he said. Ohio. Maybe a prisoner's number. Nate had the camcorder up once more, framing the can, the hand, the tag. Dude, this is an X-Files cold open. Don't be clever. Julie snapped even as she hugged herself tighter. They called the non-emergency number. A patrol unit arrived, 2 officers who didn't hide their confusion at the words wall ashes. They took photos. They took the tag. They bagged the cloth. They told the family apologetic that a detective would follow up. When the officers left, the screen door gave a harp string twang, a familiar boinging that echoed down the hall and died too quickly. Julie unplugged the lamp and replugged it, as if restarting light could restart normal. The detective called back within the hour. The tag number matched a state file, a man named Harlan Hal Bixby, convicted in 1978, dead in 1980 in a transport incident while being moved through Lorain County for a hearing. There had been no record of cremation, no record of release to family. The detective's tone was tight, embarrassed by history. He explained they would send someone Monday to take custody. As he spoke on the phone, a thin hiss bled through the receiver in Julie's ear, a sibilant bedding of static like breath searching for a throat. Julie pulled the phone away, stared at it, then put it back. Yes. Monday, she said, her voice small. We'll keep it safe. They put the lid back on the can and set it on the mantel away from the open cavity. John cut a fresh sheet of drywall, but did not nail it up. Leave it open, he said, until they take him. That night they tried to pretend at normal pasta salad. Nate's homework at the table, Emmy's picture book about a dog that lived on a boat. Grandma crocheted a bright square that hid the shake in her hands. At 9:12 p.m., the heater coughed 3 times short and wet, like a smoker clearing his chest. From the corner void came a soft slither of sandpaper sound, as if something dry and many-fingered were relearning how to crawl. Emmy's head snapped up. Did you? We heard John said. Everyone heard. He set the camcorder on its tripod again and pointed it at the mantel and the hole. The red tally light flickered. The tape rolled. The timestamp gnawed its way forward. At 10:00 p.m., the grandfather clock in the hall struck each chime, landing a shade flat, muffled like a bell wrapped in cloth. Between chimes, a second rhythm appeared in the corner, a slow scrape. Pause. Scrape. Pause, as if someone were pulling fingernails across raw wood and listening for the right note. Baxter's bark cracked the room once, twice, then escalated into a frantic volley that bounced off the ceiling like thrown stones. "Buddy down," John said. But the dog's eyes were black saucers, his body a single tremor. The camcorder kept rolling. Its little microphone drank the room. Later, when they would play the tape, they would swear that between Baxter's barks and the scrapes, there was a voice low and tight. Here. Here. Not a child's after all. A man's paper dry threaded with dust. Now in the present of it, John did what men do when the dark laughs he acted. He picked up the can. "We're moving Hal to the garage for the night," he said, making the dead man a guest with a first name because it felt like control. Concrete floor, cooler. Julie hated that plan, but she hated more the idea of leaving the can beside an open hole that breathed. "Do it," she said. When John lifted the can, a faint rattling came from inside a grain, shifting against metal like rain in a tin roof. As he stepped away from the corner, the scraping stopped, and a sound like a finger dragged once along the inside of the duct followed him. Baxter lunged at John's feet, not to bite, but to block, as if guiding him around an invisible pit. "Easy, boy." John skirted the coffee table. He set the can on the garage workbench and closed the door between house and cold concrete. He exhaled. The garage swallowed his breath in a white puff and returned nothing, no echo, just the dry tick of the cooling water heater. They gathered again in the living room, the hole in the wall, now an unblinking eye. "Tomorrow," Julie said, "we go to a hotel." "We can't leave, Grandma," Emmy said. "We can't leave Baxter." Grandma pressed a palm to her chest. "I am not leaving a house that has shown us its wound." At 11:06 p.m., footsteps creaked across the upstairs hall, even though everyone sat downstairs, the boards complaining in a sequence that traced a body going from Nate's room to Emmy's, then to the top of the stairs. The staircase answered with one deliberate groan. In the duct, something sighed. Baxter's head snapped toward the basement door instead. He tore from Emmy's side and set himself at the top of the stairs, growling the sound a low motor that vibrated the hinges. His growl deepened, layered, until it felt like more than one dog sounding from the same throat. John Julie whispered, "Don't." But John opened the basement door. He clicked on the light. The pull chain gave its hollow clack-clack, and the bulb buzzed to life with a thin electric whine. The stairs went down into a square of poured concrete edged by shadow. On the far wall, directly below the living room corner, a discolored patch marked the cinder block, as if something dark had soaked it long ago and dried in a shape like a long hand. Baxter went stiff, then shot down the steps, nails clicking in a frantic metronome. At the bottom, he erupted into a volley of barks, so violent he skidded sideways, his sounds breaking into squeals between barks. Baxter Emmy cried. She was halfway down when John caught her. "No. Buddy, come," John commanded. Baxter didn't look back. A new sound rose then deep and close, a rumble that seemed to come from inside the wall itself, like a truck idling under the foundation. It swelled, then broke into a roar, not of volume, but of texture, a rush of sand and breath and throat, and beneath it, a man's voice speaking without lips. Here. Baxter lunged at the discolored patch. His teeth snapped at air. He pawed at cinder block like it was soft. He shoved his muzzle into the seam where wall met floor and howled. The howl cut through the house in a single terrible ribbon of sound that rose and wobbled, and then went thin as if strangled mid-note. John Julie screamed. She didn't know what she was asking. John thundered down the stairs. He grabbed Baxter by the collar. "That's enough." He dragged the dog backward a foot. Baxter twisted, panicked, not to bite John, but to not let go of the seam. For one bright and impossible second, John felt a current of air moving inward through the base of the wall, cool and steady, as if the house were inhaling. From behind the cinder block came a wet, quick scratching like something clawing from the other side. Then a single knock, full and hollow. The basement bulb flickered with a brief insect buzz. And then, no one would ever agree on the then, even in their own memories. Emmy thought she saw a hand white as candle fat slide out of the seam and take the collar. Julie swore she heard a man's breath in her left ear say, "Good dog." John would tell police later that he felt the collar go slack, as if someone had unclipped it. What they all knew was this: they were looking at Baxter when he was there, and then they were looking at the same space when he was not. There was a single clatter as the metal ring on his collar kissed the concrete and spun a little tin coin ringing itself to stillness. Then silence thick enough to hear the tiny tick of cooling metal in the furnace pipes. Emmy's scream broke the silence. It came high and jagged, a torn sheet shriek, and collapsed into sobs that hiccuped through her small chest. John grabbed for the seam with his bare hands. No, no. The cinder block held. Dust came away on his skin. He hammered it with his fist until his knuckles bled. They searched the basement for an hour, then the crawl space, then the garage. John pulled the workbench away from the wall as if the can might have replaced the dog. The can sat where he left it, quiet as a held breath. When they came upstairs, the house met them with a taut quiet, the sort of quiet that has recently eaten sound and is waiting for more. The camcorder's red light still blinked. John turned it off with hands that shook. Emmy pressed Baxter's collar to her chest. The metal tag chimed once against the ring and fell still. Grandma touched the arch of the living room eyes on the open wall. "We have taken something that wasn't ours," she said, "and we have been noticed. Morning light in Ohio is supposed to be gentle, a pale wash over frosted lawns. But in that house, dawn only thinned the dark. It never erased it." Emmy sat at the table clutching Baxter's collar, cheeks hollow from crying. Nate replayed the camcorder tape frame by frame. They all leaned close when the red digits reached 11:59:23. On the grainy screen, Baxter still barked, lunging at the wall. At 11:59:24, a shadow darker than shadow spread under him. At 11:59:25, his body blurred as if pulled sideways by a force the lens could not name. At 11:59:26, only the collar spun on the floor. The tape carried a sound too, a heavy dragging breath, like someone inhaling ash. Julie covered her mouth. That was him. The prisoner. Grandma Alma shook her head. That was not just a man. That was what his anger became. John shut off the tape. His fist trembled. "We're leaving. Today. Before they come Monday. We can't stay one more night." But when he went to the garage to get the car keys, the keys were gone. The workbench was bare. On it sat the coffee can, though he swore he had left it against the back wall. The lid was half open. Ash dusted the bench in a crooked handprint. The garage door rattled once hard, shoved from the outside, then went silent. John stumbled backward. Inside, Emmy whispered, "Baxter's not dead. He's inside the wall." I heard him whine. And just then, a muffled whimper floated from the duct, a dog sound cut short like a tape chewed in the player. Everyone froze. That evening, the house itself seemed to lean toward night. The furnace kicked on, then off, then on again, each time coughing a hollow wheeze like someone dragging air through water. Nate refused to go upstairs. Emmy clutched her backpack, ready to run. Julie begged John one motel. "Even if we walk." But Grandma Alma refused. "It won't matter. The anger knows our names now. At 9:00 p.m., the grandfather clock struck once, though no one had wound it. With each vibration, the wall answered thump, 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 until the rhythm became a second heartbeat in the living room. Suddenly, the TV snapped on by itself. Static hissed across the screen. Behind the hiss was another noise, faint but sharp, the squeal of nails against metal scree, each dragging slow. On the screen, static wavered, forming outlines, the gray blur of a man's head, tilted rope biting his throat. Emmy screamed. Nate yanked the plug. The TV stayed on. Inside the static, a voice scraped through, "Here, all of you. Here." Then the coffee can tipped on the mantel. The lid spun off. A ribbon of ash drifted out and curled downward straight into the open wall. The house groaned deep in its beams, the sound of wood bending under invisible weight. Julie clutched the children. John stepped forward with a hammer raised. The corner waited. The duct rattled once more. And beneath it all came a low growl, not the dog's, but something imitating the dog, deeper, wetter, promising hunger. The night tore itself open. John swung the hammer at the wall, desperate to smash through. Plaster cracked, dust raining, but behind it lay only more darkness. From that darkness rose a sound, slow, wet chewing, like teeth grinding bone. Emmy shrieked, clutching her stomach. A low, childlike giggle rippled from the vent, broken and reversed. A laugh turned inside out. She doubled over, and when Julie pulled her close, her shirt was already red. 4 long scratches glistened across her belly, fresh, deep like claws had written their claim. Hospital Julie screamed, but the phones were dead. Nate grabbed the camcorder and swung it wildly. The viewfinder caught shadows crawling up the walls, stick-thin arms writhing like smoke. On the tape speaker came a voice. "Here, stay." Grandma Alma tried to stand, but her legs folded under her. She collapsed, eyes wide, rosary slipping from her hand. "It's taken me," she whispered, her voice shaking. She wasn't dead, but her body refused to move. John turned on the coffee can. "Take me instead," he roared. He kicked it across the room. The metal rang out a long, metallic clang that didn't end echoing too long, as if bouncing in a cavern under the house. Ash spilled across the carpet, spreading toward the corner like water finding a drain. The wall pulsed. Inside it came the pounding of fists, furious and fast, thump, 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 until the whole room shook. Nate stumbled backward. Emmy whimpered, her voice thin. "Baxter's in there, calling me." Julie's eyes locked on the camera still recording. "If we die, someone has to know." She grabbed Nate's hand. "Film everything." Then the floor vent roared a blast of breath, hot and cold, full of screams, layered over barks, a mix of man, child, and animal, all choking in unison. The curtains flew as if windows had blown open, though glass stayed shut. John swung the hammer one last time. Something seized his arm and yanked. His head snapped sideways, skull smashing the corner of the mantel with a dull crack. He dropped without a sound. Julie screamed and pulled the kids close, but ash was already swirling up around them, forming a man's torso out of smoke, and grit rope burned into its neck. Its hand stretched forward. The living room filled with a sound too large for the house, a chorus of groans, growls, and laughter, until the air itself vibrated. The corner was no longer just a wall. It was a mouth. The house no longer felt like wood and plaster. It felt alive, breathing, waiting. Julie clutched Emmy and Nate, pressing them into the farthest wall. Dust, swirled ash, rained from the ceiling. From the corner came a guttural roar, thick with spit and gravel rolling through the floorboards. Nate raised the camcorder. "If someone finds this..." His voice shook. The red light blinked, The shape in the ash stepped forward, rope burned into its throat eyes, nothing but pits. With every step, the floor groaned long and drawn out, like beams splintering under ocean weight. It reached for Emmy. Julie shoved her daughter aside. The hand caught Julie instead. A hiss slithered out of the wall, joined by the crackle of flames, sudden wild. Her body jerked as invisible cords wrapped her tight to the chair. In seconds, fire licked her skin. Julie screamed once high and broken, then vanished into smoke. Emmy's voice cracked into sobs. Mom, Grandma Alma lay still, eyes open, body paralyzed. Children, don't fight. Houses always win. Nate tried to run, but the carpet turned soft, sagging like mud. He sank screaming arms, flailing. The sound of tearing fabric ripped through the room, not from clothes, but from the wall itself, as though it was splitting to swallow. Nate was yanked down his body, flattening against the plaster until he was gone, his scream muffled inside the walls. Emmy crawled toward Grandma, shaking. But the shadow bent low claws, grazing her stomach wound. Her scream was raw, gurgling, drowned by a growl that rose from the duct like thunder dragged through iron. When silence returned, only Alma remained unable to move, tears cutting her cheeks. She watched the corner seal itself smooth wall again, no hole, no crack. Only darkness pooling at the baseboard. Hours later, police found the front door ajar. Inside, overturned furniture, scorch marks, blood smeared like handprints. No sign of Julie, John, Nate, or Emmy. Just Alma in her chair, trembling, but alive. She could not explain. On the TV stand, the camcorder still blinked red. Investigators played it. For 47 minutes, it showed shadows, crawling flames, blooming screams layered with howls. At the very end, the tape cut to static. Through the hiss came one last sound, the whimper of a dog, then a single metallic jingle, Baxter's collar. And the final frame froze on the living room corner, darker than dark, as if it were still watching. And that's where the tape ends. The family gone, and the house silent, and only the corner remains. What do you think? Did the prisoner's spirit finally claim them all? Or is something else still hiding in that wall? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you dare, don't forget to subscribe for more terrifying, true-style horror stories.